Good afternoon, everyone. Those in the waiting room should be populating into the main space now. My name is Mary Knotts, and I'm here to welcome you to today's webinar. Just a few housekeeping reminders, and I'm going to turn over the show to the important people. This is a webinar setting. If you do have questions, concerns, anything you'd like to ask, please drop those questions in the chat or the Q&A box. We'll be happy to get to them at the end, or if they're urgent, get to them during the discussion. This webinar is being recorded. We're going to post it probably on our YouTube and somewhere on our website after the fact. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Allison.
Excellent, thank you. So as Marian said, if you guys have questions as we're going through, please make sure to drop them into the Q&A. You can drop them in the Q&A box or in the chat. She's going to help me monitor both of those. But I'm really excited to host this very distinguished panel of these three industry leaders here in the DC market. We're here to talk about how to leverage your public sector skills in the private sector, as I know this is something that's been front of mind for a lot of us in the region. I'll introduce myself. I'm Allison Pavlonis. I'm the current president of AIADC for the year 2025. And I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. So we'll kick off here with our first question, which is introductions and storyline. I'm hoping each of you can briefly introduce yourselves and share your current role and your career path. A little bit about how did you get to where you are today, and then we'll dig into some of the more meatier topics. So I'll ask Bob to kick us off.
Okay, well, thank you, and thanks for letting me be here. I have no idea how I got where I am. I refer to it as my so-called career. So I should tell you, first of all, I'm a lawyer by training. I was in classes at law school and found out that the revered architectural historian Vincent Scully was teaching his basic architectural history course down the hall at the Yale Law School. And I just got fascinated by it and have managed to cobble together a career. So I'd have to say, for the purposes of this conversation, I have been in and out of the private and public sectors. I worked on Capitol Hill for Senator Moynihan, who was a great advocate for architecture. I was twice the head of public buildings at the General Services Administration. I've worked at the National Endowment for the Arts, and I lead the government practice at Gensler, the large architecture firm that you all know. It's sort of one thing led to another, but I will say, as a non-architect, I've worked with architects most of my career, and relevant to what we're going to talk about, I've been in and out myself, but I've also seen architects moving in and out of private and public sectors, and I look forward to sort of sharing a little bit about what works and sometimes what doesn't work, and what makes you valuable in the private marketplace, and what skills you bring from public sector experience that I think are relevant.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Anna?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Before I introduce myself, I wanted to say on behalf of the University of District of Columbia how much we appreciate the AIA, the AIAS, Gensler, our Gensler mentors, Fire Blender Bell, BMDO, and NCARB for supporting our HBCU students. We have multiple internships, which are so appreciated, around $25,000 a year in scholarships. We've earned 9 1,000 scholarships from the AIAS program. And our students, for the first time ever, were able to attend last year the AI conference, and 2 of our students are now licensed architects. So we're very proud of that, and it would not have happened without the AIA. So I am a registered architect and a registered nurse, and I spent 5 years of my career in the Navy CEC. 30 years in federal government, with 50% of that time as in executive roles. In fall of 2019, I joined the University District of Columbia, and I have participated and been able to meet many, many people through the AIA Fellowship, and as well as being a member of the National Academy of Construction. I started my career as an instructor, actually, in nursing, medical surgical program at Texas Women's University. I did not want to pursue a PhD in nursing. I wanted to pursue wellness and facilities that enhance health. And I really began working very closely with students while I worked with Stephen Ayers of the Architect of the Capitol. He allowed us to hire up to 25 students each summer in their internships. And, you know, we just really had a fabulous program. So when I did finally retire, I looked at UDC, and we are all about the college that I'm in. We're all about healthy cities, healthy people. I just made the call. I was hired in 3 days, but academia was a 150-degree pivot and lots for me to learn to be successful in that career.
Thanks, Anna. Stephen, please.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Ayers, an architect and fellow in the American Institute of Architects. More importantly, I'm a University of Maryland graduate. And any of you see the men's game day before yesterday with that last 3 seconds to go? And last night,
And
the
the
women
women.
won in double overtime. Fantastic. Go Terps. I'm also a University of Southern California graduate. I went to graduate school there. And perhaps like many of you, I've hit a few roadblocks in my career. I'll tell you about one or two. For example, I wanted to go to law school after graduating from architecture school. So I went and took the LSAT and quickly determined that that was not the right path for me after tanking the LSAT.
Good
So
call, Stephen.
yes, I turned, you know, that door was slammed shut. So I turned to Dream 2 and want to travel the world and see all the great places that I studied in architecture school. And so, being the son of a Marine, I joined the military. I joined the Air Force, though. I joined the military, and after a few years, I was ready to be transferred and received orders to Alaska. Not quite the dream come true. So I resigned my commission. And lo and behold, less than a year later, I was stationed on the island of Rhodes in Greece, working for the federal government, the State Department, and the Voice of America. Spent 7 years traveling throughout Europe, indeed seeing all the great places that all of us study in architecture school. And was ready to come back stateside, applied for a job at the Architect of the Capitol, was hired off a telephone interview, and served there for about 10 years. And the Architect of the Capitol then at the time retired. I applied for that job, was lucky enough to be accepted, and I served another 12 years as the Architect of the Capitol. I retired in 2008, started my own company, and been working like a madman ever since. 100% of that work has been through my network. And today I am serving as the interim CEO of the American Institute of Architects. Thanks.
Thank you all. So I don't know if everybody caught this, but I know I did from our previous conversations that the three of you know each other.
Yeah.
This isn't the first time you're meeting, right? Like on this panel. And I think that's really great insight into developing your network. So I'm hoping that you all might be able to speak a little bit about how you've expanded your networks over the years, developing connections, because I think that's something really important in the current climate, how we can really tap into our networks. So Bob, I'm gonna go back to you. You want to kick us off?
I'll just note a couple. I've had a lot of jobs. I have either quit or been fired from a bunch of jobs, and in each of them you have a different kind of a network. But I'll tell you something that's really unusual. When I came back to Washington, also after the Army, in my case, and law school and then the Army, I was working at the Office of Management and Budget. Seemed like a good job for a lawyer who didn't really want to be in a law firm. And I found out that there was a group was then called Don't Tear It Down, that was trying to save the Willard Hotel from being demolished. I got active. By the 1980s, I was president of what we then called the DC Preservation League. And my first network in Washington area real estate, which has proven to be invaluable through the years. A network, ironically, of developers, sometimes against whom we were advocating and sometimes with whom we were cooperating, started when I was president of the DC Preservation League, trying to save historic buildings and trying to convince developers that that was a smart financial move, which I think in this town, fortunately, we were able to convince a lot of them over the years. So that was a network that was really incredibly important. In the course of working on Capitol Hill and working in part on public buildings issues, I met an awful lot of people who were doing that kind of work. That was helpful both in my public sector job at GSA, because I had relationships, and also in my private sector job, including now at Gensler. And then one other network work I'll just mention, I forgot to mention that after the brief time in which I was actually a zoning and real estate lawyer, not the happiest period in my life, except I did meet my wife, I got a job at the AIA, being the vice president for government affairs at national headquarters. And in that, I met Art Gensler, who fast forward 20 some years later, 30 years later, I was leaving GSA and Art said, how would you like to come work with me? We'd stayed in touch. Gensler had been a terrific client for, or GSA had been a good client for Gensler. I had nothing to do with those selections, by the way, but it was also a very interesting network. Also, I'll say one other thing. I think AIA, I mean, I've been to chapter meetings, national conventions. It's a terrific network. So is ULI, because the developers are there. DCBIA is, you know, all of those are really good networks. And one thing I just suggest to architects is, you know, get out, make your AIA friendships, because, you know, you'll go between firms over the course of years, but also reach out to the other parts of the real estate industry, where you'll find some other opportunities, including some of the public and private sector opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you mentioned ULI and DCBIA. I think it's always interesting to hear from you all, like what specific organizations you found to be helpful. Anna, what are your thoughts on leveraging your network?
Well, I have had a variety of very different networks, and not all of them build on each other. They're all sort of independent. I have a deep association with the Civil Engineer Corps, with the National Academy of Construction, where I have worked, I forget how long now, in their Executive Insights Committee. And, you know, we're working with constructors and designers and suppliers all over both the United States and internationally. Certainly with the AIA, and through my career, I would like to say that I was fortunate that when I did design my commission, that the Department of Justice picked me up. I thought I was going to start at NAVFAC in their health facility design group as an intern, essentially. But I was fortunate that they picked me up as a GS-12. And from there, GSA taught me all about how to work in the federal government and all the rules and who I needed to know. And that was really a launching pad for me. And from there, Smithsonian recruited me, and I worked on the old patent office building. And at that time, got to meet a lot of individuals in preservation. And so that was another set of preservationists, was another set of individuals that were very helpful to me learning about preservation deeply. And from there, I went to the National Institutes of Health, worked on the first biodefense laboratories. Now, that was a very, I would say, more limited type of work, because and you have to learn a lot of new things working with scientific directors and institutional directors. And after that, I was lucky that Stephen Ayers picked me up, and I was able to then meet a whole group of new people. So I've had a lot of different, I would say that they were all kind of independent, but every once in a while, like coming back now working in academia, I now work with many different architecture firms and individuals and we have common experiences, and so we can share. And I would say I am still a person still learning. So I think that being a lifelong learner is really essential. And, I am shy to a fault, but I have learned in my current role now serving as the associate dean that I have to be everything to everyone. And I pick up the phone. You have to pick up the phone and introduce yourself and work on partnerships. And we are working currently at the University of District of Columbia on a whole new educational model and integrating business with academia. And again, I'm once again learning, and I'm always finding the right mentor.
Yeah, I love that. Important to keep those goals open and interested in pursuing new connections always. Stephen, do you want to talk a little bit about your network and connections?
Sure. Yeah, let me share two perspectives. First, I can vividly remember as a closet introvert, I was bemoaning having to do something to a colleague of mine, a mentor of mine. And he said to me, Stephen, your net worth is equal to your net work. And so that really struck home for me. And I began volunteering, and I volunteered for many, many, many years. And there was a period in my career where I said yes to everything purposefully for a period of time to push myself out there. I volunteered for boards, committees, conferences, panels, speeches, anything I could find. I strategically put myself out there, and I went to every event, and I can't ever recall missing a cocktail party. I networked my way to be the chair of the Construction Management Association of America, the chair of National Institute of Building Sciences Board, the chair of the Construction Users Roundtable Board. And these roles brought new awards, new recognition. It got me inducted to the National Academy of Construction, fellowship in the AIA, and numerous AIA awards. All of those, each one of those is hundreds of people that I had the opportunity of meeting during each of those roles as board service. So for me, it's simply been putting in the face-to-face work and the face-to-face time and finding organizations that were looking for volunteers and ways to help companies and people. That's sort of my first point. And my second point is really a story about Allison. As we were prepping for this event, and she suggested that I speak about how I've built my network on LinkedIn and other social media sites. And as a baby boomer, baby boomers don't do that. And I'll just come back to my last point. And Anna's point of picking up the phone and calling people, staying in touch, and volunteering and putting in the effort to the face-to-face events that are out there is the way that I've personally done it. And I'm sure my colleagues who are also baby boomers have done it as well.
Yeah, I'll say there's face-to-face networking, and then I think what we've all said is, you're everybody, about networking. Could I just say, don't go to a cocktail party and just start handing out business cards, because that's your network are people that you've been in the trenches with, people that you've done work with, people you've sat on boards with, because then they really get to know you. And Stephen, that's an important point. If you do get an opportunity to get up on a podium and give a talk, I mean, you just multiply a lot the number of people who've seen you. And if you do it in a way that's the least bit engaging and informative, they're going to remember you. And when opportunities come up, they'll say, oh, that woman, she seemed like somebody I'd like to get to know better, or somebody I'd like to give a shot at working on. I saw a Q&A, by the way, about somebody saying, Stephen, good, you said that how do you get on a board? How do you get, and it's the same thing. People just kind of know you and have a sense of what you can do. being on a board, one other thing I'll just say, because I've been on it, we've all been on a couple, I'm sure. People want to know that you're a good collaborator. Being boards are all about, a team putting things together, and you can have disagreements, but people want you to be somebody that can do that in an agreeable way.
Bob, I'll also say that, approaching a networking event, you might go in there thinking how all of these people can do something for you, which is precisely the wrong perspective.
Yeah.
You should walk in the room and ask everyone, what can you do for them?
That's a
Yeah.
good point.
And someone may tell you something, and then you go do it, and then you've got that lifelong connection.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And many times you find things that you can do together, and that both of your ideas are fabulous, and you might think about it a little bit differently, and then you have a real partner.
Yeah. And you know what? Connecting people. Sometimes you have a conversation at a cocktail party. It happened to me last week. And you're saying, somebody's saying, I'm working on something. And I'll say, you know, that's not something I do, but I have somebody you really should talk to. And I'll put together a coffee or breakfast or something. And then you've also helped cement yourself in their minds as somebody who's useful to know.
yeah, that's all great advice. I think similar theme I heard was digging into your passions, causes that you find interest in, or organizations that like you're specifically, give you energy and passion to get involved. Bob, your experience like with preservation, and then Stephen, your experience as well on a few of those different board positions. So I'm hoping that you might expand a little bit on how professionals can balance their passions with the practicalities of a career transition. I know we all want to be able to like do our most passionate work, but sometimes, that might not necessarily be like the next opportunity for us. So curious what advice you have for finding the right people to support us as, we might be looking for a new career transition, but perhaps it's not the most passionate thing for us.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bob. Yep.
I'll just say that, even if you can't, I've said to a lot of people, don't, life is too short to do a job that you don't want to go to every day. I've had a couple of those and bailed out pretty fast. But, yeah, there's a practicality. I did it once when I had a wife and two young kids and a mortgage, so that's, you ask yourself a lot of questions. Even if you can't find the job you're passionate about. Me, I'm passionate about public architecture, been a long time. If you can't find a job in that, what else are you passionate about? Are you passionate about managing? Are you passionate about being on what we used to call the design table? I mean, find some aspect of a job in which you think it relates to your skills and what you like doing. And you can generally find that. I mean, you're probably not going to go out if you've chosen to be an architect, not an accountant, you're probably not going to go try to be a CFO someplace. On the other hand, if you can find a place where you can use your creativity in a way that isn't graphic design or interior design or base building, there will be an opportunity to find something you can do that relates to your skills. And one thing I'm going to say, just to pitch to architects, I used to say when I was at the AIA, Stephen, in law, if a law firm partner goes out and becomes a CEO of something, everybody says, "Way to go." In architecture, we tend to say, "Oh my gosh, they've left the profession." And for goodness sake, I mean, the fact that you've learned how to manage projects, the fact that you can think out of the box, if somebody like a Bill Gates, who I gather was studying to be an architect at one time, goes out and says, "Boy, I'm going to go create something different," we should celebrate that. Become Janet Marie Smith, who revolutionized the architectural design of baseball stadiums without actually being on the design side of it, but being an advisor to clients. So, I mean, there are lots of things I think you can do that we should celebrate and that you can find a passion for.
Stephen, that speaks to your experience, right? Architect to CEO.
That is true. Yeah. But if I had to offer some advice on this topic, I guess I would say work is not the only place to follow your passion. number one, and perhaps it shouldn't be the place you follow your passion at all. And hold on to your seats here. A baby boomer is going to tell you that work is temporary, and you need not look at the job you have or the job you're aspiring to be the job you're going to have for the rest of your life. And be open to change. Every new opportunity will expand your network, will expand your leadership skills. And do you really just have one passion? And do your passions change throughout your career? I think my passions have changed throughout my career. In my early career, I was really passionate about architecture and design. I think I'm more passionate about people today than I am about that. And so my passions have changed, and perhaps the other panelists' passions have changed throughout their career as well. And you should be open to the change that new experiences will bring to you, and may open new passions for you as well.
What do you think? I assume you've had a lot of hats, and switching into education is certainly something that can be a passion for many. Curious to hear your thoughts.
I agree with what Stephen just said and with what Bob said. I think first what I would say is everyone should, and I think probably everyone does this anyway, but at these points when you're transitioning from the public sector to the private sector, you have to really, I think, honestly assess yourself and focus on your strengths and weaknesses. And so, we're all great because of our strengths, but sometimes our weaknesses hold us back. And so trying to, decide where you are in your career and how much longer you're actually going to be at work versus retired, you might want to think about filling gaps. And if you want to go into academia as an architect, they're looking for PhDs now in all of these universities. Not necessarily, it used to be licensing, but now it's there's only a few universities that require an architectural license. But you can fill that gap with a PhD at UDC in our program. You can earn a PhD within 3 years. The same thing at George Washington. But if you have an idea that it's something you would like to do, you certainly come to the table with a whole set of wonderful skills, and if you're willing to learn about the crazy world of academia, you can be very successful in it. I would, my passion certainly has become students and communities, underserved communities. And so, I find a lot of my time is volunteering, helping students fill gaps that they come to the university with, whether it's math, science, English, writing, whatever it might be. But we want every student to be successful, and I think the same thing is true in architecture. In our profession, we want every single person to be successful. And you can, as Stephen said, you can be successful at your job, in your community, with your family. And I think we all are driven by the idea of wanting to do better for ourselves and our world and the people that really are dear to us. And so, I would just say you can fill those gaps. I've had to fill gaps. We've all had to fill gaps. And you do, from the public sector to the private sector, you come with a whole set of skills that aren't necessarily as strong as yours. And so if you can pivot and you understand that the private sector is business driven, it has metrics, outcomes. If you're that kind of person, then you can pivot. You bring a lot to the table. And it may be harder to come from the public sector to the private sector in perhaps the design world, because technology is changing so fast. Our students are so unbelievably gifted when it comes to software, but they don't necessarily have your level of critical thinking, problem solving, understanding of contracts, that kind of thing. So I think I know these times are difficult, But I think architecture as a whole is actually going to benefit by a whole set of people learning lots of new things and driving the industry into an ever-changing world. And I guess what I would say, I saw a brilliant presentation the other day from Mike Marshall and Sean Pichon, and they are architect developers now. And so, you know, they never thought they would be that, but they're bringing their culture, their interest to DC, and it's going to make DC a better place. So I think there's a big future out there as an architect working in lots of different ways.
Yeah, no, that's all great points and really tees us up to get into the meat of one of our more important questions, which I think is how to transfer skills. There's obvious differences, as you alluded to maybe some of the things you've developed in the public sector. How would you advise people to be prepared for that, or perhaps we have a question in the chat about how to craft a compelling resume to make the transition, and also wondering about, I don't know that we want to dig too deeply into compensation, but like preparing yourselves for the differences in compensation conversation, perhaps. Bob, do you want to kick off on that one?
Well, yeah, I've always thought that the main thing that public sector architects have that they can bring to you know, I'm going to focus it from a private sector architecture firm, design firm, is that you know what the client perspective is. You've seen all, you know, I mean, I hate to say the thing I've disliked about private sector work in architecture is this. When I was in the public sector, both working on Capitol Hill, working at the National Endowment for the Arts, working at GSA, the work hit me every day. I didn't have to go find it. I was out there, you know, more work came to you every day. I'm sure this happened to you, Stephen, and at the architect of the Capitol's office, then you could get done. You walk in the morning, think I'm going to do this, and then 12 other things happen. In the private sector, you got to go get the work. And I think one of the advantages that you bring, having been in the public sector, is you've probably been on the side of making selections for architects to do projects, or you've been working alongside people who are doing that, or you've managed projects after someone's been selected, and you kind of know what gets to what drives clients crazy and what makes them sleep well at night. And I can't tell you how many times we've been preparing for an interview or doing a presentation in response to an RFP where I've been able to say, I don't think we're talking about what the client's going to have on his or her mind. And I think we need to know that. Second, I've often said that, you know, I've seen a lot of presentations by architects and brokers and others, and I can tell what distinguishes one presentation from another, what's just kind of table stakes, as we used to say, but just, yeah, everybody says that. And distinguishing even better what you can do. And so that should relate to what you put on a resume when you're going to for a private sector job. Talk about some skills you have that will really help that company get ahead to win work or to get work done. You know, I've worked on projects of this scale for such a long time. I've been the glue between the architect and the GC. So, you know, those are things that carry over no matter what you're doing. One other thing I'll just note, there may be other skills you have to have if you haven't been, if in your public sector job, you haven't been the person designing, you know, I wouldn't say, you know, it would help. Anna talks about getting some other skills. You may need to learn Revit. You may want to go out and get your computer skills up to a point where you can do that kind of design if that's the kind of job you want. But I think there are other jobs in private sector related to architecture that wouldn't require that you do that.
Yeah, Stephen?
Thank you. I guess if I were to offer some advice here, that it would be that first, pay attention to what Anna said about this ability to look in the mirror and do an incredibly honest self-assessment. You really have to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. And you're really wrong, usually wrong about those things. So get some advice from some trusted friends, advisors, or mentors. I think that would be helpful. And then, in the federal sector, we have our own language. We have our government speak, and our titles mean a lot. In the private sector, it's really not that way. So you find a way to get rid of the government speak out of your resume and really focus on problems and solutions, really get results oriented, I think is really critical. And do that either yourself or through an editor or through a mentor to kind of get out the government speak. It just doesn't resonate well in the private sector. And um, perhaps lastly, Bob mentioned this, you have to go get the work. And so technical skills don't go get the work. It's your soft skills that go get the work. And so I would build up on your ability to build relationships and trust and to be a leader and to be able to write effectively and get along with others and not just say those words, but demonstrate it through your writing, demonstrate it with examples and storytelling in your resume as well.
That's great. Anna, did you want to add anything? I know you talked a lot about skilled transitions.
Well, I would offer Gensler. They do a fabulous job of working with our students on their portfolios and resumes, and as Stephen said, get some outside perspective, because writing down what your job description just doesn't work. You have to be able to tell the story about how you solve problems and what the outcomes were, and really to be able to quantify it. But it has to be in the language that whoever you're speaking to. And most of the private firms, it's all about business and results and your ability to drive positive outcomes. It's all about value, right?
Can I just say that's a really good point? Both of you just made, and I'd forgotten. What you write in a government position description, as they call it, is pretty much the opposite of what you need for a private sector resume. It's just way too insular, and it doesn't. Stephen, I think you talked about storytelling. It doesn't tell the story of what you've done. Don't think about how long I was in that position. I got promoted to branch chief or whatever, nobody cares. It's, what did that mean? I managed a team of 12 people delivering projects worth X amount of money and doing it on time and on budget. And, if, those sorts of things resonate a whole lot more than just a list of titles that you've had. You really got to make it real.
Yeah, that's great advice. The one thing I think, just to answer the questions in the comments about compensation, even in the private sector, there's a ton of different compensation models. So I would just try and categorize all those for yourself, so that you can understand like what the full compensation packages are, no matter where you're going, because it differs from firm to firm, as I'm sure it differs very much from public to private.
Yeah, I think if you're in, particularly for people who are coming out of the feds and you can rely on a retirement at the end of the time if you want to last that long, you need to understand a little bit more about how 401ks work or retirement, defined benefit retirement plans if they have them in a company that you're looking at. It'll be different and sound not quite as solid, but there are trade-offs. And there are bonuses in the private sector you don't qualify for in the public sector so much. And you need to ask some questions. I would say talk to some of your friends who are in the private sector and find out what they've learned about what matters and what doesn't when people are offering you different kinds of compensation schemes.
Yeah, and I thought, I think maybe Stephen advised this, but I think it's great advice to get your resume out there potentially to your mentor, or really try and, run it by somebody who might have some outside advice. AIDC can certainly set up a resume workshop if that's of interest, to people in the chapter. We're happy to do something like that. Our Emerging Architects Committee does have an annual event of a portfolio and resume workshop that's more targeted towards emerging architects, but we can certainly, look to host something like that if that is of interest to a broader audience. I'd be happy to do that.
One other little bit of advice: if you do make it to an interview, do your research on the company. I can't tell you how many times I've been in interviews and somebody says, "Oh, I didn't know you guys did that," and I'm thinking, really, it's all over our website. Come on, show you put a little effort into this before you walked in the room. You should be able to say that project you did in Shanghai. Wow, that blew me away. Something that shows that this isn't just another interview for you, and just not just another application, if you can tailor your application as well. And somebody did ask, do you need to know somebody at the firm? It helps. I mean, it helps in the federal government also, but it helps in the private sector if you can get somebody to give you an introduction, because someone's got to pick your application, resume, and portfolio if you've got it out of a pile.
Yeah, I would say to the cover letter as well, right? It's nice to
Yep.
read a cover letter that is targeted and not just broad-based. So starts with the cover letter and then really blossoms mostly in the interview. Every firm really wants to hear why you want to work for them specifically, right?
And back to your network. Your network can help you find some place to go, or maybe find somebody at the firm who might advocate for you.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, talking about just different career paths, can you share some examples of successes or failures, perhaps from your own careers, or from others that you know of? Like, just talk a little bit about, it's a lot about taking those skills and making them reality, and what examples of success have you seen from other colleagues, perhaps, that have done the transition like yourselves? Stephen, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I would say I look at my colleague Anna Franz and Bob Peck, who both are success stories with a long history of public service at the highest levels, learned how to be exceptional leaders through that, and transferred those soft skills into new careers. And so I would just point to the two of them as really great success stories that learned how to be exceptional leaders, learned how to get things done. And again, soft skills, both of them are really, really good at that.
Well, thanks. I'm going to say, Steve, it's maybe, it's a skill that you have that would translate over to the private sector. If you haven't seen, what was the TV show in which you took people through the Capitol Dome, Stephen? Your Capitol Dome renovation?
Yes.
And that is an awesome interview and tour. And, just having the skill to do that, a very high profile project. One of the opportunities you have in public service often is to get up in front of people, or, give presentations. It's been helpful to me that when I've done a couple of projects where I've had to appear before a county council, and honestly, I appeared before congressional committees so many times that's not a big deal anymore, but you have a sense of how that game is played. So it's another skill that you can take. And I mean, Stephen, even being interim CEO of AIA is, all of those skills have to come to bear. I will say one thing. There's a guy who worked at GSA who went out. Honestly, he's an engineer, not an architect. He ran property management. He went out and created a company that does property management mostly for government agencies because he could talk their lingo. But won a boatload of contracts, a hugely successful company in the space of less than 10 years. So there are those kinds of skills and contacts and knowledge that you have. One other thing I'll just know, we did say, and we're right, don't talk in federal acronyms. It turns everybody off. On the other hand, whether it's federal, which we know the budgets are being slashed, but state and local, knowing procurement systems, working for a private sector firm and being able to say, I know how this works. Oh, we can't ask that question. They're in the cone of silence. They've issued the RFP. That sort of knowledge is very useful for people who don't deal with government a whole lot. So there's that aspect that you can bring to the private sector.
Anna?
And I may not be answering the right question, and I was going to highlight Stephen and Bob as two people that I just greatly respect and always thought of them as wonderful mentors and always admired their work and how they manage their organizations. I was going to just give a short story on a project. I won't say which project, but it was going south, okay, in a major way. And the construction manager, we wanted to actually release them because it was so south. And the individual, the owner of that company, stepped up and said, I don't care what you're saying, I'm going to make this successful. And he jumped in and he drove his business, drove the project to success. And it was because he persisted. He had emotional intelligence. It didn't upset him that he got negative feedback. He just said, let's focus on the business at hand and let's make it happen. And I would say that ability to, just maintain perspective, help everyone maintain their perspective, and to persist is what you have to do in this new world that you're facing in terms of finding a new job. When the world tells you you can't do it, you can do it. You just have to persist at it and bring your own leadership to bear. And I always think of that because sometimes, always something is going wrong, but you have to have the ability to, and as public sector and individuals, as Bob said, you have more experience than anyone in the private sector in much of what the private sector is about. And just persist is all I'm saying. And have confidence that you will succeed and that you can make it successful.
Yeah, that's great.
I think one thing it just occurred to me. When I left GSA the first time, I went and talked to a headhunter who was a friend. And he said, well, Bob, just remember one thing. You were running the largest office portfolio in the United States, but people in the private sector know you didn't create it. The good people of America, through their tax dollars, built up a huge portfolio. You got to shepherd it for a while, right? But, steward it. But, so you need to say, here are the skills I took. Yeah, I didn't create a portfolio. Here's what I was given to do, and here's what I got done. And then here's what I think is important. Coming out of the public sector, and we're seeing this an awful lot these days, it's tragic, but in the minds of a lot of private sector people in the government, let's be honest, I'm not going to make any political points, but they think public sector people don't work hard and don't get things done. And so I think it's really important, without being defensive about it, that when you come on, you let people know that you are a can-do person, that you are enthusiastic about what you do, and that you have gotten things done, and that people will feel better. But you need to know that is an impression that you're going to have to overcome. So trumpet all the things that you've done. We've said this a couple of times, put it in terms that they understand. I ran a courthouse project, you know about building 250,000 square foot buildings. I supervised 3 of them, right? With a very tough clientele. may I say, because federal judges aren't easy clients. So, like Congressman Stephen, and they are, and if you could manage that client relationship, boy, you've got another story to tell.
Another thought comes to mind that I don't think we've said yet, and that is that people want to help. Don't be shy about reaching out to anyone. You would be surprised how people genuinely want to help. And it brings me so much joy in my life when I'm able to help someone in some way, help someone find a job. I know Bob is like that. I know Anna is like that. And I know so many others that are like that, that would just be thrilled to hear from you and to find a way to help you. So don't be shy to reach out.
Yeah, I noticed, and I'm sorry we won't be able to get to all of the questions in the chat, but one of them that builds on that is what's a good cadence to keep in touch with folks? Do you guys have recommendations? Like how often would you follow up with people? We're talking a lot about networking and reaching out to people. How much is too much? And like, what would you say is the appropriate amount of time between calls, between emails to keep trying to leverage that? Bob, what are your thoughts?
I have a friend here who runs a construction company. I shouldn't say whether it's a he or she because it gives it away a little bit. Who maintains a calendar of contacts that this person gets in touch with. Some people are every quarter. That's way too organized for me. But I did just have something occurred to me the other day, and it's somebody I know who works at a government agency that I want to do work with. And I just wrote and said, this somebody I feel like could do this. Haven't seen you in a while. How about, sometime in April? You don't want to sound like it's got to be tomorrow. Um, and to me, one other thing, sometimes you'll be at an event, and you do say to somebody, let's go have lunch or let's go have coffee, follow up and just say, anytime in the next couple of weeks, you got time. So I don't know. There is such a thing as too much, but I'd almost say it's in this case quantity over quality. Reach out to a lot of different people. You don't have to see somebody every 2 weeks to stay on their radar.
Yeah,
That's more than a science, I think.
from my perspective, I guess when I'm doing like BD leads, I usually will follow up. If I don't hear within 1 week, right, then I'll follow up like 1 week later. If I don't hear again after that second follow-up email, then maybe I'll leave it a little bit longer, like say it's a month, or evaluate, do I need to retarget whom I'm talking to and what what my priorities are or who I'm prioritizing.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if you have coffee with somebody, don't say, well, let's do this again next week.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like people are too busy to do it.
Right after the day after you go to that networking event, you get that business card, follow up the next day or follow up as soon as you can, and then try and make good on the connection that you made. Other thoughts on that question?
I guess if I were on the receiving end of that, it's really job dependent, but every 4 to 6 weeks is, I would hear from someone. I wouldn't be offended by that.
Yeah.
And I think your point is right, Allison. It's just like business development. And so keep a schedule, develop a schedule, unless you're Bob, who that's way too organized for him, but develop a schedule and put time and effort into it.
Yes, you have to invest.
I see another question here in the chat about how to bolster business skills, and I'm not sure if that's like the business of architecture or business development skills. I guess just on the business development piece, I would say start trying to practice your networking skills. On the business skills piece, do you guys have any advice on how to do that? I know that there's a lot of like online education. Anna, you were, referring to programs at UDC and otherwise. Thoughts on that one?
I think if you don't, there are opportunities on the internet now. If you don't know, if you're going into a design firm, you've not been in the private sector, you ought to know what utilization rates are about. You ought to know how people think about, you know that a firm is profit making. It's worth diving a little bit more into what profits are made out of, how people borrow money, and a little bit of that is a useful thing. I once gave a talk to a room of architects, I'm sorry to say, and I said, okay, we're going to just start out real estate 101. Who can give me the definition of debt versus equity? And it was crickets in the room. So if you're going to work if you're trying to get work with a developer, for example, you need to immerse yourself a little bit in real estate finance. And there are ways in which you learn a little bit about the business of design firms, which you can also get online now. And, people have written lots of books about that, managing architecture firms, just so you're a little bit conversant. I think it'll also prevent you from being too shocked when you walk in the door and find out how they manage. I was surprised to get to Gensler and find out I had to do a timesheet every week. I thought that was something only lawyers did
I wish we could get rid of
when I
that.
was a
Yeah.
lawyer, and then I found out, oh my God, I'm back in this. So, but there's a good reason we do it, right? And you should know a little bit about why that happens.
I've as a leader, I've spent a lot of time on accounting and finance matters. When I retired, I was asked to join a board of a private company, and I was soon the chair of the compensation committee, and my whole lack of understanding equity and shares and how all of that happens in a private company, I was completely unaware of it. And I went to Google University and I spent a lot of time educating myself on that. And I am pretty good at it today. I'll also plug AIA just last week released a business acumen series. And so you can find that on AIA.org. Kicks
Awesome.
off at AIA's conference in June in Boston.
Wow,
That's great.
that's great. Steve and I had exactly the same experience joining the board of a publicly held company. Oh my gosh.
Drinking out of a fire hose, huh?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we have
stocks, restricted stocks, valuation. I just knew nothing about that, but I needed to learn.
we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask each of you if you could very briefly give one book, podcast, or resource recommendation that you found useful. Bob?
Wow. I don't know. Come back to me. I'm gonna have to
Okay.
figure it out.
Anyone
I
else?
can think of one.
Well,
I'll since I worked on Capitol Hill and I'm very versed in answering not the question you asked, but the question I want to answer,
Why not?
I'll just say, call somebody. Not a book, not a website, not a podcast. Reach out and talk to people.
and I'm going to recommend Kathy Dixon, who is an associate professor at the University District of Columbia, also is the owner of KDA Architects. And she wrote the book Business of Architecture. And I think that I'm sure she's not on the podcast, but I will let her know that I did this. But I think she would be very pleased to answer any question about managing a firm. She had two firms and now is managing one firm, and she's very open about sharing her success and less than success stories.
Thanks.
And I'm gonna come back and just say, I like both of those answers. And if anybody wants to shoot me an email, I'll be happy to answer.
Awesome.
Happy to talk to you.
Well, thank you all so much for your time. It's been really a great conversation. I really appreciate all of the participation too from everybody in our Q&A, and we would love to hear from you. So I'm sure we'll send a survey out after this if you have specific content you would like for us to host, that resume workshop I mentioned or otherwise. We'd be happy to do that. So thank you all so much for joining.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.